God, we are so excited to get started. My name is Rachel Nemhauser. I'm here from the ARC of King County, and I'm here to talk about working with families with high support needs. I will just put it out there right off the bat that I am in the middle of a cold right now. So if I sneeze or cough or have to stop to blow my nose, I apologize in advance. But it was important to me to be here. So thanks for putting up with that. I am here with my colleague, Ramona. Ramona, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name, let me get this poll going. My name is Ramona Hattendorf. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Civic Engagement at the ARC of King County. Really happy to see everyone here. We also were wondering who's in the room with us. So there's a poll. Hopefully you can see it on the screen. And if you can't access a poll screen, we'll have a survey later, a link later that you can click and let us know who you are at that point. Yeah, it looks like we have some paraprofessionals, other professional.
Oh, nice.
Additional roles. All right.
Wonderful. I love that.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right.
Okay, cool.
It's always nice to know who's in the room. So
It helps me when I'm presenting, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to share about the series a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So we're the ARC of King County. This series is part of a series that we're doing for the Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Network. If you aren't familiar with that, it started off about 6 years ago as something called the Inclusionary Practices Project, I believe it was. And at that point, it helped set up demonstration site and pilot school sites for really doing a lot of intensive inclusive work to make sure that students with disabilities could be included in general education curriculum. This phase is more about ongoing technical assistance. And part of that is it's run by the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. They also have a partner called West Ed, which is helping them coordinate things. And then they have education partners throughout Washington State. And one of those education partners is the Family Engagement Collaborative, and we are a part of the Family Engagement Collaborative. It's the ARC of King County, it's Roots for Inclusion, it's PAVE, which does a lot of really good work on special education, and special educated parent support, I should qualify that, and then Education Northwest. And we're doing we have 3 actually series going on. 2 are aimed more at professionals, or one can be a professional parent mix, and one's more at mix. And so this is part of our Insights on Supporting Families. We have others on there, so I hope you take part in them. When we send them out, you can do them live. You can also take them at any time. So anyone who registers for one of our classes, I will send you a link to the webinar. I'll send you a link to the presentation. So either way works.
And the slides are available afterwards as well.
Yes, they are. So that's who we are, and that's what this is part of.
So we covered this part.
Oh, yeah, kind of. I mean, not super deeply, but yeah. So the ARC of King County, we promote and protect the rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we also really do a lot of work, both. How do I describe it? We do information and family support work. We also do some direct support work, and we do a lot of civic engagement and advocacy work. Basically, we try to make sure that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have a meaningful life where they make choices and they live the life they want to live. And that means meaningful access to education and meaningful employment, quality healthcare and genuine community connections. So there's a little bit of information about us on here. We offer a lot of services. So if you ever want to reach out and learn more, please do. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Rachel.
Awesome. Wonderful. Let's jump in. I want to say first, before I proceed, just to share a little bit about myself, that like Ramona said, I'm the Director of Information and Family Support. I've been here at the ARC actually next week on April 15th. It's going to be my 10-year anniversary. I've been working for the past 10 years, really intensively supporting families raising kids with disabilities. I also am a parent of a 20-year-old autistic son who's here and could interrupt me at any moment. We'll see how that goes. This presentation came from a place of really wanting to explore what makes a family feel like a difficult family to support and why they might be the way they are. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about we're going to dive into the parent experience. This is our agenda. Parent experience, why parents might reach out for help, what we can do to help as the professionals in their lives. Then we're going to talk specifically about supporting multicultural families, supporting families that are specifically difficult, and supporting parents with IDD. Just as a funny aside, I presented this at a conference last year and was asked to change the name. The name was Supporting Difficult Families, and I was asked to change the name to Supporting Families with High Support Needs. And I did, because I'm not here for a fight, but also I never want this presentation to come across like I'm criticizing parents. I am a parent. I love working with parents, and the experience of parents and supporting parents is what I'm passionate about. So this presentation comes with a lot of compassion and empathy. I'll also say I really love your participation. Please share your thoughts in the chat or take yourself off mute and jump in. This doesn't have to just be me talking for an hour. I'd love to hear from you as we're going along. Okay, so with that said, let's talk about it. First thing I want to get into is, what is the parent experience? What do we hear from the parents we work with? And the first thing I hear almost 100% of the time from families I talk to is trauma. I don't know if parents have what you would diagnose clinically as like PTSD or anything like that, but I know that most parents who I work with, or all parents who I work with who have a child with a disability, describe being traumatized from that experience, maybe from a traumatic birth or a really horrific medical experience, maybe from a huge diagnosis they didn't see coming. Maybe from a professional who spoke to them in less than kind or respectful words. But regardless of the source, we know that the parents we're working with are traumatized. And one of the first things I learned working here was the concept of trauma-informed care, which I probably we could teach a whole other class on that. But to me, that just meant knowing that the families I work with have been through a lot, and that I'm going to see that trauma likely to show up in our interactions, and that I expect it, and I'm okay with it because I understand where it's coming from. Another thing I hear from parents regularly, a long history of fighting for services and to be taken seriously. I think about when a family arrives in kindergarten, for example, because I remember this with my kid. By the time we arrived at kindergarten, when other kids' education was just starting, we had been in a fight for 5 years already to get my son the services he needed and to get medical providers to take his needs seriously and to acknowledge his developmental delays. I also hear from parents deep fear and grief sometimes. And this is an important caveat, because for some parents, for many parents, the diagnosis of a disability brings grief. It brings grieving a life we thought we would have, a child we thought we would have, certain experiences we thought we were going to have as parents. And when it comes and we sometimes, conclude we're not going to have some of those experiences, there's grief associated with that. And there's also fear. I wasn't prepared for this. Am I good enough for this? Am I going to be able to handle this? But there's also a caveat that for some people, the concept of grieving a disabled child is really insulting, because for some people, it's what is there to grieve? My child is perfect. They are exactly who they're meant to be, and I love them, and I wouldn't want them any other way. And I only mention this because if we assume every parent is in a deep state of grief, we do risk insulting people. but I would want to approach any family I'm working with that question of how are they coping with this diagnosis. Parents are struggling to navigate complex systems. From the earliest age, parents are trying to figure out insurance, early intervention, special education, developmental disability, social security. It is, for anyone who's ever had to navigate those services, it is intense and it is overwhelming. And you're doing it when you have a baby or a preschooler, where I don't know about you guys, I wasn't getting a lot of sleep in those days. I didn't have a lot of free time. And navigating those complex systems is really intense. Another experience we hear from parents is that they're facing a lot of taboo and a lot of stigma around disability. This is especially true in certain cultural groups more than others, where disability is seen as this was your fault as the parents. What did you do to cause this? And for the communities where that is a really present value, it can be really difficult for those families to seek help and to seek support, especially from within their own community, which can then lead to the next thing on the list, which is isolation. And we hear this from so many families that their worlds get very, very small, that getting out of the house can be really difficult. For some families, it's because taking a ventilator and a trach out of the house is really complicated and hard. For my family, it was hard behavior. It was challenging behavior. Taking my son out into the community, especially when he was much younger, was really hard. And we ended up home a lot. And we ended up, our social circle, our world got really small. And we hear from families, I hear from this all the time, families who have no one, families who have no support system, no family, no friends. They're really just doing this on their own. We hear from families that are really struggling with their own inadequacy. Can I do this? Am I good enough for this? And is my family going to be okay? Is my child going to be okay? What about their neurotypical siblings? Are they going to be okay? So much worry. I'm curious if there's anyone in the room who has anything they might add to this list. Feel free to put that in the chat. Oh, I see the comment, Stephanie, medical trauma is so common in our community. It is, it's so true. And, my son is a really overall healthy guy, but we have had to interface with the medical system over the years for mental health care, for to get a diagnosis, for other kinds of things. And it is really hard and really traumatizing to go through those systems. So then the ultimate question at the bottom right corner, how might these experiences a parent and their ability to engage in their child's, well, this says special education, but in anything regarding their child? I was sharing with Ramona before everybody joined the meeting. What I always say is I can guarantee that the professionals I interacted with in my son's early years were not getting the best of me. I think I'm a nice person. I think I'm an easygoing person, but with all of this going on in my head and in my experience, in my recent history, it was very difficult for me to show up as my best self, to be flexible, to be cooperative, to remember things, to show up when I was supposed to show up. So I think it's an important place to start in this conversation. Thank you. I see I went through the same with my son. I assume, Jesse, you're referring to not being showing up as your best self after all of this stuff. Thank you for validating that. I mean, the last thing I ever want to do, exhaustion. That's a really good one. I should add that. Sleep deprivation is a really important point, especially when we're talking about, really little kids, but also a lot of, it's very common for autistic children to not sleep well. And for kids who have like medical issues, they might need care all night long. So you're right. A lot of the parents we're working with are exhausted. And not just physically exhausted. I think there's like a level of emotional exhaustion too. So then if we're specifically talking about special ed, what do parents experience specifically navigating special ed? we hear confusion, like, what is happening? What is this? What is supposed to happen? What is my role here? Why are they saying that? What are they doing? Confusion, paranoia. So this one was my favorite. I don't know if anyone else faces this, but I spent a lot of time thinking, are they judging me behind my back? Are they talking about me behind my back? What aren't they telling me? I don't know where that came from, but I don't think it was just me experiencing that. So much worry. I was told by everyone involved my voice mattered. I was an important part of his special ed team, but I were at school. So there was a lot of worry and a lot of intimidation and insecurity. Am I doing this right? Should I be doing more? Am I letting him down? Am I failing him as a mom because I don't know how to do this right? It really is an intense experience to go through that. We also know that for the most part, parents are coming into school and to special ed having heard way more bad stories than good. You don't have to spend much time in a Facebook group to see nightmare stories after nightmare story after nightmare story listed. My personal experience and my experience talking to families is that there are way more good stories than bad, but people aren't going on Facebook groups and posting that for the most part. Whether or not it's true that special ed is bad, we just know that parents are hearing special ed is bad. And so they're coming in, I would think sometimes, I would say even like with a chip on their shoulder. I hear families, I get a call regularly from parents of kindergarteners saying, do I need to go to my first IEP meeting with a lawyer? And the answer to that is no, by the way, but I think, or in most cases would be no, but that is, I think, the mental space parents are in when special ed starts. That's what they've heard and what the history, where they're coming from. And then I think it's also important to remember that many of the parents we're working with have themselves experienced special education services. They themselves were special ed students back when they were kids. And so their kid being a special ed student is very triggery, can really set off a lot of the bad feelings they had. So we might say, well, special ed in the 80s is really different than it is now. So what you might have experienced in the 80s is not what it looks like now. I don't know if that's true or not, but that might not necessarily be comforting. When your nervous system is triggered, it's triggered. And if you're reminded of your own bad experiences or reminded of your own feelings of feeling left out or feeling underestimated, then you can imagine where this might really be problematic for families. So with all of that said, the question is, how might these, well, first of all, what else? You guys added some great ones the last time. Anything I missed? Or Ramona, feel free to jump in too if you have anything. So then the real question is, how might these experiences impact a parent and their ability to engage in their child's special education? And I think the answer is similar to the previous page. You're not necessarily seeing a parent's best self at that moment. They're scared, they're sad, they're grieving, they're traumatized, they're confused and paranoid and worried. It's a hard place to be.
And then this, Ramona, I was just saying, then you just add on that, then they're going into yet another system that they have to learn about, yet
That's right.
service, do I want this? And it's not only a lot of information to absorb, it's a lot of decisions that you need to make yourself and then trying to convince other people or find out, or is this even the right course of action? Do I really want this? It's a lot.
That's right. That's right. Anything else anyone would like to add? Parents are expected to wear so many hats. It's true. It's really true because they're telling you, you are your child's advocate. You are their voice. You are the person on this IEP meeting. You are, an important part of this. But all the while you are mom and you just want to be mom. I want to be doing arts and crafts projects and snuggling and watching cartoons together. And I didn't want to do this stuff for what it's worth. Didn't mean I didn't have to, but I didn't want to. So thinking about when parents might reach out for support, I think there's four main categories, I would say. The first would be a new diagnosis. Either it's the first diagnosis they've had and they weren't diagnosed with autism and now they were, or it could be, well, they were autistic, but now they also have an anxiety diagnosis or a ADHD diagnosis, some kind of new diagnosis. They might reach out for help navigating all these systems we're talking about, DDA, special ed, Social Security. They might reach out because they're new in the area and they're just trying to get settled and acquainted with their new community, or they're reaching out because they're in conflict or crisis related to special ed. And I think it's helpful to spend some time thinking what that family might be thinking or experiencing in any one of these situations. We know, or we could assume with a new diagnosis, I talked about there might be grief, there may not be. There might be fear or overwhelm. I hear that so often from parents of kids who are diagnosed with autism. It is really overwhelming. You're sometimes given hundreds of pages of resources and told, like, go find ABA therapy and good luck, and you're sent on your way. There's, I think, a huge element of just overwhelm and grief. For families who need help navigating the system, again, overwhelm. For anyone who's tried to apply for Social Security or the Developmental Disabilities Administration, these are really complicated, complex systems. It can bring up a lot of feelings of, like, do I want to be leaning on the government for help? Where does that align with my own values? Do I qualify? Do I make enough money, or too much money, or to get the services that we need? You can only imagine what that would feel like for a family. For number three, families that are new to the area, I think about parents that need help with everything: a pediatrician, a dry cleaner, a math tutor, a friend for their child, a friend for themselves. The people who are new to the area are thirsty, I think is what the young people would say, thirsty for support. And then we have those that are experiencing actual conflict or crisis. And this is a small group, I think, compared to everything else. Most of the families we work with have a question, they need help with something, but there are some that are just in actual crisis or in actual conflict with their IEP team. Those families, more than the others, tend to have a lot of anger and resentment, frustration. Although it's not unlikely that you're going to feel frustrated navigating Social Security too, to be honest. But there's this element of anger that comes up with number four that you might not always expect, and isn't necessarily fun to have pop up. And we'll talk more about that. Any thoughts about this? Or what I might be missing here? So we've just spent a couple slides talking about, like, what are parents going through. I should add, and I wish I had a slide that said, like, there's also the immense joy of being a parent and loving your child. And I think that's an important element to include. But knowing we're here talking about the difficulties, I guess I kind of left that out. So what can we do to help as professionals? I'm here specifically for parent support. I think some of you said that you were paraeducators, that you're other school professionals. And I think this list is relevant for anyone who's here. The first thing I'll say is listen to the story. Listen to what they have to say, even if it's long. And I'll tell you, sometimes it takes a long time. I speak to families sometimes. I generally set aside an hour per family, although sometimes it takes longer. I have had multiple experiences where the person just talks for the whole hour. I do very little interrupting. I ask a few clarifying questions maybe, and mostly I'm doing, my active listening, like, yeah, wow. that kind of stuff. I just give them space to tell their story. And I think there's a lot of, you could learn a lot from the story, obviously. You learn a lot. I always think it's really interesting where they start the story. So if somebody is calling me because they're upset about something that's happening to their 10th grader, but they say, well, okay, it started in kindergarten, then I know, first of all, I know I'm in for a long story, but also I know this is not just about, they're upset about one thing. This is like a long, complicated amalgam of problems mixed together. I think there's real value in that. But I encourage you to take the time to listen. A lot of validation and compassion and understanding. Oh wait, I don't know if I meant, oh, what? Share parts of your own story as relevant. I do that because I'm a parent of a autistic kid, so it's really easy for me to relate to the stories that I hear. For some of you, that might not be your personal experience, but for some of you, you might be parents and know you might be a parent of a neurotypical child, but still know the hard parts of parenting and can validate that. I see a comment, just listening is incredibly powerful. Parents can feel like they don't have a safe space to share their vulnerable feelings and raw truths. That's exactly right. I mean, unless you have a therapist, it's really unlikely you have someone to just tell your whole story to. I'm happily married. I've been married for 26 years. I have a lovely, lovely, loving husband. He doesn't want to hear me talk for an hour straight. And I really don't think, maybe you could ask him, but I don't think that's what he wants. The being able to offer that to a family is really a powerful gift. I agree with that. I also really encourage you to share compliments and positive observations about the child, about the parent, the parenting, the parent-child relationship, and the parent's advocacy efforts. I was never more insecure than I was in my kids' earliest years. I was a new mom. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I had autism on top of it all. I really didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't know if I was doing it well or doing it badly. I didn't know if everybody was like, she is not good at this. So anytime a professional was able to say to me, you're really doing a great job, and something more, even more specific than that, like a specific observation, was so helpful. I'll give an example. I took my son at 10 months old to get to early intervention for an evaluation. And when the evaluation started, I had to put him on the ground for a minute so I could sign a paper. And they said to me, look how when you put him on the ground, he stared at you the whole time. He's really connected to you. You've done a great job building an attachment with him. My God, that was like exactly what I needed to hear. And this was from pretty much a stranger. They didn't have to know much about me or my relationship with him to point that out. I really encourage that whenever you can. And I love to compliment the parents. Oh my gosh, I love to compliment the parents I'm working with on their advocacy efforts, especially if they accomplish something that's hard and they do it in a way that's respectful. If a parent says, well, I was able to get them to assign him a one-on-one, it took 6 months, but I did it. I love to say, wow, you are a really good advocate. That is hard to do. You have these great advocacy skills. And then the last thing I would say is point parents towards other parents and towards parent support opportunities. The ARC of King County and parent to parent specifically is a great option for that. For anyone who doesn't know, parent to parent is a program that's nationwide. It's parent to parent of the United States. And then there's also parent to parent of Washington. And then every single county in Washington has its own parent to parent. It's actually legislatively mandated because it's considered such a effective model for supporting parents of kids with disabilities. So parent to parent is a great opportunity. We have it here in King County, but it's all over the state. But it's not the only opportunity. There's great social groups online, Facebook groups for parents of autistic kids, Facebook groups for parents of kids with a variety of disabilities. And I know Facebook groups can be dicey sometimes. There could be drama, but just helping. I always say to families, like, just having other families with disabilities in my timeline made a huge difference. I wasn't just looking at what I perceived as perfect family after perfect family. I was looking at families that reflected what my family looked like. And it made a really big difference, even though I'm not like prone to a lot of engaging in those groups. Anything I'm missing? Or what about anything we should avoid doing? This is a really powerful question. What do we avoid doing if we want to help?
So this is Ramona. I'm not sure
Yeah,
it's so much of what we're doing, but what really comes back to me is, patience.
yeah.
Yeah,
Patience.
and
That's
yeah,
right.
patience
Mhm.
and be flexible and, just sometimes it's just when any of us, if we've got a lot of anxiety, if we're upset, things are going to spew out and then you might settle down. So just some patience. Yeah.
That's such a good point. I am sorry that every time I move the mouse, it flicks to another another slide. Sorry about that. I think patience is a great one. I'd avoid calling a parent by mom or dad at IEPs. Use our names. That is so true. They always do that. That's a really good point. And can I guess your reasoning for saying that is it just doesn't feel like a very respectful thing to be called, or like it's acknowledging that you have an identity beyond being your child's mom. I think that's true. I also would say I would avoid making promises you can't keep, like he'll be fine or it'll all work out. I mean, it will, but like, I don't want to ever minimize a parent's concern about their child. And I don't ever want to promise that their child will be able to do X, Y, or Z. I don't know. Um, Another one, try not to judge. Every person's story is different, even if there are similarities. That's true. I think that's a great one. No judging. Obviously we're going to judge if we see abuse, and that's a whole separate subject if we see like really bad parenting, but there's a lot of ways to be a good parent. Usually phrases that start with at least end up not being helpful. I love that. At least he's not X, Y, or Z. Yeah, my oldest son, who is mostly a neurotypical kid but was a young adult, but is was speech delayed as a 2 and 3 year old. And I was very worried about his speech delay. And all the professionals kept telling me, I know kids who are way worse than him. You don't have to worry. There are kids that are way worse. That is not helpful um, at all to me. So you're right. I think comparing kids and comparing families is another thing that's not helpful. Is like, well, the other families have found this to feel good or whatever. I don't find that to be helpful either. Thanks for all the feedback, you guys. I appreciate that. So let's talk about this phrase, difficult. What makes a parent difficult to work with? And for each one, I want us to consider why might they be acting like this and what might we be able to do to help? So the first one would be confrontational with or disrespectful towards staff. Has anyone ever experienced that with a parent that you're working with? I don't personally tend to be super confrontational or disrespectful, but I've had moments where I've been angry and I'm not, like I said, acting my best. Why might a parent be acting like this? I think back to those first few slides of everything a parent has been through. And if you are tired and if you're overwhelmed and if you're grieving and you're scared and you're worried and confused, and then somebody tells you no about something, you might see some confrontational or disrespectful behavior. What can we do to help in that situation? I think patience, like Ramona says, understanding in our head why they're doing this, being literally understanding, like just having that compassion of, I see why you're doing this. And I'm going to say this later, but I want to say it here again. None of us deserve to be abused in our jobs. I mean, or in our personal life. None of us deserve to be abused. So I am not at all saying here that if a family is abusing you and yelling at you and calling you names, that you should put up with it because they've had a hard week. That's not acceptable, but a mild level of bad attitude, I guess I would say, or rough attitude is and maybe we all have our own lines that we can put up with, but understanding that where that comes from can make a difference. So then the second one, a parent who doesn't follow up, misses deadlines, misses meetings. They tell you they're going to sign a paper and return it, and they don't. They ask for a meeting, everybody shows up, they're not there. They show up to the meeting a half an hour late and then expect everyone to stay late at the meeting. I am guessing I'm not the only person who's ever worked with families like that. It is really frustrating because as a professional, I don't act like that. When I say I'm going to be at a meeting, I'm at the meeting. When I say I'm going to call you by a certain day, I call you by a certain day. I have to remind myself the families I'm working with are not professionals. They're parents, they're families, they're living normal life, and they're doing their very best. Again, the overwhelm, the sleep deprivation, it can lead to missing meetings, missing deadlines. And what I hear from that parents want is the professionals in their lives to be okay repeating themselves, to be okay resending the thing they already sent, to be okay explaining this a second time. I know you already explained it, but I still don't get it. That kind of conscious patience, I think, and willingness to accept a certain level of chaos and confusion with families. Third type of difficult parent, parents that ask for too much or who are asking for things that are impossible. Yeah, Stephanie, you make a really good point, and we are going to talk more about this, but Stephanie makes the point, it's important to remember that parents might also have IDD. It's true, and we actually just spoke at a team meeting recently about the challenges we experience as professionals working with, some of us do have ADHD, but working with parents who themselves have ADHD, or working with people with disabilities who themselves have ADHD, or executive functioning challenges, that it can be difficult to try to get a family through a very paperwork heavy process when they're not good at paperwork. That can be a really challenging thing. And it is a part of my job. Like, I decided that helping families who struggle with this is still a part of my job. I'm not here only to help the ones that it comes easy to. Lisa says, a lot of parents don't understand processes and what goes on the other side of the fence. Oh, I mean, that's so true, especially when you don't understand how special ed works. And I think that's the same with number 3, or maybe that was what you were talking about, Lisa. Like, I ask for things because I don't know if what I'm asking for is a totally normal thing to ask for or a totally exceptional and crazy thing to ask for. I also might ask for things that I see other kids getting, and I don't really understand the context of why they have it and I don't. Oh, Lisa's saying I'm coming at it as a mom with a child in need. That's right. That's exactly right. We have families that are asking for things that feel impossible and that feel maybe like they don't understand the limitations of our job. They don't understand the limitations of the system. At some point, it could start to almost feel personally insulting because you're like, I am just trying to do my job, and you're asking me to do things that are way outside my job to do that. So I already said, why might they be acting like this? Because they might not know what limitations are. And what can we do to help? I think helping them understand the limitations and being patient with explaining that, knowing that some people are going to have a harder time understanding that than others, but that it takes time to explain what's within the range of normal to want and need and what isn't. And then number 4 is just a general, requiring lots of reminders, lots of support, and way more help than the average parent. And when I think of this, I think of a family I work with where mom is autistic and she has 2 daughters who are twins, and they both have the same genetic disorder that results in very high support needs and blindness. Mom has her hands full, and it's hard for her because of her own autism to manage both of their IEPs, both of their DDA, both of their Social Security. It is a lot. Every day, it's a lot. She's doing amazing. I've been to her home. It's clean. It's beautiful. Her kids are clean and beautiful. Everyone's loving and kind with each other, but it's hard. And this is a mom who's going to always need my help. And I'm okay with that. Like, if I'm not here to help her, who am I here to help? I know she's going to need more help than the average mom. I'm not telling her, well, everyone gets an hour, so you only get an hour. I'm okay acknowledging that this person with this set of circumstances is just going to need more from me. And for some people, they're just going to need more from me right now. For some people, they're just always going to need more from me. But for some, it's a more temporary situation. And I just make myself available for that. What else, what am I missing here? Or what other thoughts? What do you have to add?
So, Ramona,
Yeah,
um, I would say conscious co-regulation. If someone's distressed, it's like you can match their mood and both of you guys
mm,
can escalate and it can be a very bad thing. Or even if you don't escalate verbally, you might be internally, escalating yourself. And it's not an easy thing to do. I'm not suggesting it's an easy thing to do, but it's kind of the same thing. Like if you've got a very dysregulated child, it's like being able to, co-regulate and helping them, like it's just wild. It's like a Wi-Fi they can set, to your
right.
car. But really thinking very consciously about co-regulating, and in the same tactics you might use with children that has to have a calming, positive environment. I think you can use those tactics with parents as well.
I think that's such a good point. And then the thing that occurred to me as you were saying that was true. If I'm getting upset, I don't need someone to get more upset, and then I get more upset, and then they get more upset. But also, it's infuriating when you're upset and the person is like calm as can be. So stay calm, but use other ways to make sure the family knows that you take their concerns seriously.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about supporting multicultural families. And I want to be very clear that I am not implying that multicultural families are difficult, that because they, by virtue of being from in a marginalized community, that they're therefore difficult. But I do know that working with people who are very different from me and that have very different values than me and very different experiences than me complicates the experience of working together. And when I think of supporting multicultural families, what I really think is supporting someone different than you, supporting someone who comes from somewhere different than you. We know that our culture and our background impact our views on disability, on education, on advocacy, and on parent support. So don't assume shared values. I heard a great example of this once where somebody said, a big value in American public schools is working towards independence. We really want our young American children to grow up and be independent. And that's something that shows up in IEPs and it shows up in class lessons and in the planning we do for their future. That is a very American value in independence. Other Asian countries, for example, that is not a top value. Like loyalty to family would be a much more important value. So, and no, there's no right or wrong. And that's a really important point, is that we all look at this differently. We all view parenting and education and disability and support differently, and there's no right or wrong. And so rather than assuming that we all look at it the same, I encourage curiosity and asking questions and getting to know each other. And that takes time. And that is something none of us have. And that's a fair point. And I don't really have a solution to that, except acknowledging it is not easy, but that it's best when there's time put into this conversation. So I encourage you to take time to learn about the culture of the family you're supporting, especially regarding the things we talked about: disability, education, advocacy, and support. We live in a really diverse county here in King County. It would be impossible. I think there's something like 120 languages spoken in King County. It would be impossible for me to understand the history and the values of all of those communities. But I do know that there's the 3 or 4 most common cultures that reach out to us. And I have spent the time to learn about those communities. And it really makes a difference when I'm working with them. I feel this like as myself as a Jewish person, that if I'm talking to someone who has never met another Jewish person and is acting like I'm an alien from outer space, it doesn't put me at ease, and it doesn't allow me to feel like I'm being supported the way I want to be. Check in periodically to ensure you're providing meaningful support. Is this what you're looking for? Does this feel helpful to you? Does this feel supportive to you? Is there something I'm not doing that you wish I was? Or is there something I'm doing that you wish I wouldn't? Those kinds of questions. And like I said, allocate more time when working with multicultural families. The same holds true, and we're going to talk more about families where the parent is disabled, but I think it's the same in that case. Building trust takes time, but it's important. There's a lot of distrust. Something I think about regularly is when I sit in an IEP meeting. My son's 20, he's had an IEP since he was 3. So I've been at IEP meetings for 17 years. The people around the table generally look like me. They're generally like white, middle-aged women. There's exceptions to that for sure, but that's generally who's around the table. And I think that makes it easier for me to work with the team because we share these experiences, we share these values, we speak the same language, for example. And I can only imagine how different it would feel if I was sitting around a table of people who had no idea where I came from and what my experiences were and what matters to me or what language I speak. So I encourage you, with all of this in mind, to think about for a minute your own identities, the various identities you have, and how they might affect your values related to special education, disability, and advocacy. And parent support. I said earlier, we know some communities, there's a lot of taboo around disability. So asking for support is not really okay. And so when you start saying, we have so much support available, that might feel like a really overwhelming and negative thing when you think you're offering something good. So it's just something to think about. Any thoughts about that? Checking our own bias, exactly, at the door and working together to find what success looks like for the family. That's right. They are the ones who get to define what success looks like, not me. And that's hard because the special education system has its own way of defining what success is. We know that to the world of special ed, success is meeting your goals. That's as much as I've come to understand. If you really go down to the core of it, you're successful at school as an IEP student if you meet your goals. A lot of parents just define success in a much different way. That's not just about did they get 7 out of 10 opportunities, blah, 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 that we know the IEP goals. Stephanie says reframing supports to tools is helpful in that instance. I think that's a great way to look at it. That's right. And tools are just things you have the option to use if you want them. Any other thoughts about this? The next slide, we're gonna talk about interpreters. But any other thoughts about supporting multicultural families? I'm gonna add one more thing. Life in the United States as an immigrant right now is not an easy place to be. And I want to be especially cognizant of that and compassionate and empathetic to that right now. I want to make sure that the immigrant families I support get what they need, but also that they know that I'm glad they're here and that I'm glad to give them the extra time to make sure they can, get what they're entitled to. So let's talk about interpreters. Understand the reality of using interpreters. I was at a presentation once with an old colleague of mine, Patty, who is Spanish speaking, and somebody asked her in the presentation, how can we make the families we work with be willing to use an interpreter? And Patty's answer was, well, have you ever asked them why they don't want to use an interpreter? And the professionals in the room they didn't know why a person wouldn't want an interpreter. And Patty shared some pretty good answers that I like to share here. This is what we hear from non-English speaking families who utilize interpreters. Inaccurate interpretation. Interpreters who don't know the lingo. God, is special ed a lingo heavy universe? And if you have an interpreter there who doesn't know what an IEP is and how to translate that, they might just say IEP and the person doesn't know what that is, or specially designed instruction, or all the lingo we use. We hear of interpreters sharing opinions and interfering in the conversation. The interpreter will say things to the parent like, you shouldn't ask for that, or you shouldn't say that. Or they might, all of a sudden there's 3 people having the conversation, not just the parent and the professional. We also hear that this might not be the case for like the Spanish speaking or Mandarin speaking community, but when you have a community that's smaller, it's not unusual for the interpreter to have a connection to the family. And that feels really invasive to the family. There's major privacy concerns there. I've heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that interpreters don't have privacy requirements like school professionals do, or like we do at the ARC. So there's nothing keeping them from sharing outside of the room what happened in that room. Again, I don't know if there's someone who can tell me that's wrong, because it sounds wrong to me, but I've heard that that's the case. Lisa says, we've had that happen in the same small community with deaf interpretation. That's right. That's a perfect example. And these meetings are private. They're private for a reason. And I think, you know, we don't, you're not seeing the best of me. I already said that multiple times. I don't necessarily want that shared with the community. I don't necessarily want my son's test scores or want it shared, the, you know, egregious behavioral error he made at school. These are things that I'd like kept private. We know that language is a significant barrier to accessing services for families and for actively engaging. But we also know that interpreters are not the miracle solution that we'd like to think they are. I definitely encourage offering an interpreter. And if the family wants one, then there should never be a meeting without one. If there isn't one available, the meeting should be canceled, as opposed to bringing the Spanish teacher in or a sibling or someone else to interpret. The meeting should be canceled. However, if the parent says, nope, I'm fine, I don't want an interpreter, and it means that it takes longer because you can't understand them very well and they can't understand you very well, you have to go with that. And understand that there's probably a good reason why they're saying that. Stephanie says in the chat, when I was a child, the school brought an interpreter for my mother when she is fluent in English. So in some instances, it's the assumption of need based on skin color. You're right. That's racism. I totally agree with that, Stephanie. And I would never want to make that assumption. I guess, I mean, I don't know if this is the wrong way to put it. When I work with a family who has a noticeable accent, where it's clear to me that English is not their first language, I would offer, that's when I offer an interpreter. But only, in my case, I only do it if we're having communication difficulties. If there's no communication difficulty, then we don't need to do that. We're fine. Oh, you have a translator on the phone that we use a lot in school. Yeah, that's great. We do that too. We call it the language line. And I find that really helpful. But again, only for parents who want it. And sometimes I have had an interpreter on the line and the parent loses patience with it and just starts talking to me in English because they don't want to deal with the interpreter anymore. And then the interpreter can kind of just be there as backup as needed. Any other thoughts about working with non-English speakers or with multicultural families? One other thing, actually, we're talking about interpretation of spoken word. There's also the possibility, the need for translation of documents. That is another thing that parents have a right to, like to have their IEP translated into their native language, to have all major documentation and communication in their native language. So I would definitely be sure to offer that if the parent looks like they might need it. But I say that, and then I think of what Stephanie said about looks like, and I don't want to go towards that. But if a parent is struggling to understand what they're reading, then it might be nice to offer a translator or translated documents. Okay. So let's talk about when a parent themselves has a disability. And that happens a lot. And sometimes the parent has a visible, obvious disability, or sometimes they have an invisible disability, or sometimes they have a disability that seems very obvious, but they don't say anything about it. And sometimes they come right out and tell you, I'm autistic, or I have ADHD, or I'm vision impaired. I work with parents to make that decision. Do they want to be open about their disability with the school? Families fear being mistreated or seen as a bad parent if they admit that they have a disability. And honestly, I can't even reassure parents that that's not true, because I think they could be discriminated against or treated differently if their disability is named. But when I do work with families and that do decide to disclose their disability with the school, I've seen it work out really well. The family I was sharing earlier, the autistic mom with the twins, one of the things that's been hardest for her is working with the IEP team. And she has 2 IEP teams, and staying on top of the paperwork and getting along with them and communicating in a way where it doesn't like aggravate the situation, and kind of getting the right tone in her emails and things like that. These are things that are difficult to her. She and I talked about what she needs from the school, and we ended up making a list and providing it to the school. She needed one of her requests was that nobody would email her about both kids in one email. If both kids were due an IEP meeting, she wanted one email about one kid and one email about another kid. That was her request. And they were more than happy to accommodate that. We also asked for extra time in IEP meetings. We all know these IEP meetings go so fast, and she's like barely able to tune in, and the meeting's over. So we ended up getting extra long meetings for her. It's important to know that parents are entitled to the same 504 accommodations as kids are. So whatever a parent needs to access their child's education, they're entitled to. The caveat with that is they have to admit they have a disability for that. And like I said, not all families want to do that. But they're large print materials, extra time for meetings, that sort of thing. So I would say if you're working with a parent who has a disability, or maybe actually any parent you're working with, I encourage you to ask a couple questions. What do you need to effectively engage in your child's education? Has anyone ever been asked that question as a parent? I think if I had been asked that when my kid was young, I would have said some training. I need to learn more. I need to understand how this works more. Lisa, you've been asked that by a teacher or by an IEP professional? Oh, you initiated the conversation. Okay, right.
I can elaborate a little bit if
Tell us,
you'd like
yes,
me
please
to.
do.
Okay, I'm autistic, and I didn't know until I was 44. I'd been through a lot of stuff with our district, and I am an emotional based person, and it comes through in my voice. And I had run into a lot of
Mm,
problems and sitting around a table with people who are really rude and condescending and didn't want to explain anything to me and didn't want to give me time to figure out what was going on. Once I got my
mhm,
diagnosis, it took me about a year to talk with our rep, our admin rep, and say, hey, I'm autistic. I don't really want it discussed, but I need you to be patient with me. I need you to put everything out on the table. I need to have relationships with each one of my daughter's providers so that I can be involved in the process because I need to understand what's going on. It isn't just me coming to you and battling, it's us working together as a team. And I can't do that if I feel like I'm being bombarded. And I can't do that if I feel like there's a divide between us. So, it's gotten better through the years, and I don't think that we would have what we have right now, which isn't ideal, but it's better. I don't think we would have what we have right now if those conversations hadn't been at least started.
I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's a really good example of laying a foundation. Like, you're putting in this hard work at the beginning that pays off over time. And I think that if I was speaking to a room full of parents right now, that's what I'd want them to hear, for sure. And as
Well, and
professionals,
now that I went through grad school and I studied a lot of the processes that are going on behind the scenes, I can, we had an example recently where my daughter was tested for behavior and she used a completely quantitative measure, which didn't make for an accurate reading. And when we saw it in the IEP, I was like, what is this? And she said, I'm sorry, the only measure I had was quantitative. I said, well, then this isn't the truth. So we need to figure out another way to go about it. And if parents just don't know what's going on, you don't have a place to step up and say, nope, sorry, try again. So
Hmm.
I, I don't know. I've had to be upfront with them in order to get what I need from them to be really part of the team.
Yeah. And that's, it's a tough one, because when we go back to like the way parents behave, we do sometimes feel as the parent that we have to be aggressive. We get to the point where we ask nicely, we ask a little less nicely. And that it's like with your kids where you're like, could you please go get your shoes on? Can you get your shoes? Get your shoes, get your shoes, So anyway, I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you, Lisa. Second question, what barriers are interfering with your participation and understanding of the process? For me, it was probably a lack of trust in the team and a lack of understanding of how it all works. And then the third, and I already gave an example of this, how might we communicate with the team ahead of time about your accommodation needs? And I like to assist families with this task if they need it. Actually help them write the list. And I want to tell you, just as an aside, this autistic mom who has struggled for years with tone in her emails has discovered ChatGPT. And now she takes her emails and puts it into ChatGPT and says, make this nicer. Or make it, adjust my tone so it doesn't sound as aggressive, or whatever, she's concerned about. And it has helped her a lot. Just as an aside. Any other thoughts about working with people with disabilities? I think I mentioned earlier that some parents will be triggered by special ed because they were special ed students. And I think that's important to keep in mind when we're working with disabled parents, is that this isn't their first go around with special ed. One of the moms I worked with, her kids were in the same special ed program she was in as a kid, and it was awful for her. She hated it as a kid. And now she had no choice but to watch her kids go through it. And it was really awful for her and hard to move on past that. So these are definitely things for us to keep in mind. So all in all, with everything we've just talked about, I just want to provide a little summary or some ideas. The website Goblin Tools has a useful tone editor. Ooh, that could be very nice. I like that. I actually want to do a whole workshop about using ChatGPT in special education, or using AI as a parent in special ed advocacy. So stay tuned for that, because I think it's a powerful tool that can really help those people who struggle with communication with their team, or who struggle to not understand how special ed law works. Like, you could ask ChatGPT, are they allowed to deny my son transportation to school or whatever? And the bus will, or ChatGPT will tell you. So just some reminders. When supporting a parent who is unique or particularly challenging, listen actively, empathize, be patient, set boundaries. And I said this earlier, abuse should not be tolerated. We set your boundaries. I am not okay being cursed at, for example, or I am not okay being yelled at. For example, or I'm not okay being insulted. You can have your lines, and I encourage that. And then beyond that, we just kind of put up with what they bring. Offer practical assistance. The more you can do for them, in some cases, the better. The more paperwork you can fill out and just have them sign at the bottom, that's great. Consider talking to families about getting professional help, like a therapist. I definitely don't recommend saying you need a therapist. Or have you ever thought about a therapist? No, but there might be nicer ways to bring it up. Like, it sounds like you're really going through a tough time. Do you have someone to talk to? I think there are ways to bring it up where it doesn't sound like an accusation. Be consistent. Reach out to the ARC, reach out to parent for help. That's what we're here for. What am I missing? Any last words of advice you would give? I see a comment in the chat. Our experience is that the most conflict or frustration comes from not understanding the scope of services each person in the support team can provide. We feel like we do a lot of educating, and that typically brings the best outcomes. I love that. And I think that really rings true to my experience, that the less I know about how it actually works, the more misunderstandings there are, and the more I'm asking for things that don't make sense, and the more I'm expecting things that are never going to happen. I have a dream that one day there will be a training at every school at the beginning of every school year for anyone who wants it to learn about how special ed works. Just an hour-long thing. It doesn't have to be super long, but I think you're right that just some basic knowledge of how it works and how the staff, what each person's job is and what they do and what you can expect from them would go so well. Yes, yearly special ed training. Wow. One day we'll make it happen. I mean, I try, but it's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. There's a lot of people who need that information. But yeah, I think that's part of what we're doing here with this work, is trying to educate the families and professionals for better outcomes. Okay, Lisa, you could be part of that project. Love that idea. Any other thoughts about this? Here is some contact information for us at the ARC of King County. We provide support in and specialized services and activities in English, in Spanish, and in Korean. The Korean is email only. We specifically serve King County, but for anyone watching this outside of King County, we're here to try to help anyone at any time. So don't hesitate to reach out. If we can't help, we'll help connect you to maybe more local resources for you. Before you go,
Right.
Oh, go ahead, Ramona.
I was just going to say I'm gonna launch a poll. Hopefully it'll work. It's been kind of 50-50. I'm also putting in the chat a survey link. It asks the same questions. Let me.
And if you, we really appreciate you taking the survey or the poll, because it helps us get feedback to improve how we're doing and also secure funding to keep doing this kind of work.
Yeah, we really do appreciate it. And I will keep this segment of the poll private. I won't show results. So that's fine.
We're the best. So what are your final thoughts? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We can all see each other if we want. If anyone has any thoughts or comments or reflections to share. I so appreciate you being here and your interaction during the presentation. Thank you so much. And I didn't cough all that much, so that's a miracle. Thanks for being here, everyone, and I look forward to having you join us at our next presentation.
Also, I'm going to stop the recording now. So sometimes people have a question at the end. They just don't want to talk when we're recording.
That's such a good point.
Stop that.